Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The title of this session is called Hack the Law, and this is somewhat of a novelty here at NullCon, which is a much more security-oriented conference which sees lawyers in a very peculiar way. What's happening today is that each and every part of technology is interacting very closely with the physical layer. And it is laws, it is government policies to a large degree, which are in a process of evolution to also capture this level of physical change as well as interaction in our day-to-day lives. System and digital systems security, much more specifically, is a core part of this policy change, a shift in laws. And today we wish to capture what happens on the side of the technical network assessments, as well as in terms of any kind of vulnerability testing, which is a fairly broad area, and what can be the legal repercussions of that, towards evolving a framework which is responsive towards the interests of the individuals who conduct this activity in good faith or not in good faith, and what can be the state responses and the legal systems, which actually then impact the prosecution or the facilitation of this kind of activity. Because ultimately, we all share the same goal, better device security. So to start off this panel, I'm joined by people who come from the policy domain, but also come from the domain of technical analysis. So sitting right next to me is Manu, and Manu is from Cocoon. I think a lot of you know him. Manu, is this your third or fourth RightsCon?
No, NullCon.
NullCon?
No,
sorry.
Every year I attend. Every year I'm here.
So I think a large part of the community already knows you very well.
Probably.
Okay, so what we're looking from Manu here is to capture what happens actually in terms of all the conversations in the other rooms. And I saw a very interesting signboard on the first day I came in, which was how to hack into an AWS server. And as a lot, that took me by quite an alarm. So I'm hoping that these kind of skills which are being taught here and how they're being used also can be seen from a perspective of how it can improve system security.
Exactly.
Sitting next to him is Ramanjeet Singh Cheema. He's the Asia Policy Director at Access Now, which is an international non-profit working on digital rights. In addition to it working on policy and governance areas of developing frameworks on issues of data protection, privacy, Access Now also has a digital security helpline. And I believe, Raman, it started out offering as a digital security helpline for activists. Is that correct? Can you give us some perspective?
Broadly speaking, yes. It's an incident response team now that does both incident response and proactive digital security for journalists, activists, transparency people, whistleblowers, and many others globally. And it's a team which is now also part of the CiviCert network, the Civic Search that Electronic Frontier Foundation and many other groups work in. And we're also now happy to be members of the Forum for Incident Response First.
So Raman also chairs the board at the Internet Freedom Foundation, which is where I work, and I'm the executive director there. Sitting next to Raman is Neelu from ThoughtWorks, and she was earlier on the offensive side of security, and now she's towards the defensive side. I'll start this panel from Neelu itself. Neelu, can you just capture what are the different kinds of vulnerabilities testing which are employed both on the offensive side and defensive side from the perspective of, let's say, a large corporation? We'll come to government side risks a little later on, but what typically happens in terms of a third-party independent vulnerability tester discovering a security flaw and reporting it? What is that typical process?
Thanks for that. So I think vulnerability research per se is a very huge area. It has a big breadth. There are various kinds of vulnerabilities. So we know that there are various systems that we deal with on a daily basis. There are devices we work with, there are systems, there are servers, there are routers and all of that. So all kind of vulnerabilities are there. And hence you will see, so on the offensive side, there are quite a few different kinds of vulnerability testing that goes on to figure out what are the flaws in these systems and and hence report whoever is the authority or the respective party. Offensive side, it's both ways. So one is that you do an authorized testing of it, where the client themselves connect with you, and then you do a vulnerability testing for them. We call it vulnerability assessment, pen testing, and all of that. That is one category of vulnerability testing, where you test for the vulnerabilities and report the complete depth and breadth of the vulnerabilities, like how far you can go through the vulnerability, and what is the breadth of it, what are the different kind of issues you have. So that's the authorized format. There is also another format which we were talking about earlier, is where individuals can go ahead and once they find an issue, can report it to the respective party, saying that, hey, look, this is the flaw that I came across and this can lead to so and so. They go ahead and do a POC themselves and they figure that out. Many times there are most of these organizations who also have in-house teams who are doing a basic level of testing. But depending on how many people use these products, so say for example, maybe Google or Apple, so these products are being used by millions of users. Sometimes this is not enough because they get more vendors to do the testing and all of that happens. Similarly, on the defensive side, this is what, so you will have in-house teams, you have other teams who are authorized to carry this out. There is also a section of testing where, like I was saying, individuals can report it, and which is very matured outside of India, is where individuals can actually get on a platform like, say, HackerOne or Bugcrowd, which are more crowdsourcing or hacker sourcing platforms, which provide you that platform where you can test and report issues to all of these respective companies, whichever company comes and participates in that particular platform. So there are very matured platforms outside to do that for individuals, and that is called as bug hunting, where bug hunting is a very small section of a complete area of vulnerability research and testing. That's pretty organized outside, but not so here. So there are various challenges we face. As a vulnerability tester, when we are authorized, it's easy to go and report. But there are various challenges in accepting those issues and also fixing them, even when you're doing it in an authorized manner. However, there are different set of issues that we face as bug hunters, when we are trying to disclose a vulnerability, especially for people who are not in these kind of platforms, for companies, especially in India, where there is no organized structure. If we report that to them, most of the times it's either not heard or there is no respective contact, who will get back to you saying
Neelu,
what can happen.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just to provoke this conversation a bit more and ground it, do you think it's the reputational impact which is what is holding back the company responses, in addition to inability of proper resourcing in which they can actually assess what's the level of threat which is there?
Yeah, so I think at various levels, there are various gaps that are there. One is the awareness level of the company itself. Second is the security teams that they have, or the level of maturity they have achieved themselves in security. So if you will see, most of these companies who are participating in the platforms are also confident to a certain level that they have done their bit. So somewhere that's there as well. But the other side where awareness is missing is where they don't accept it or come back to saying that we will prosecute you because you have reported an issue to us, or why were you even testing for it?
So before we get to the law, Manu, I also like to know from you, like, you're very well integrated into the community here and much more broadly. What other specific instances do you feel present a kind of a threat vector for vulnerability testing, especially with regard to government entities which have rolled out such large digital systems, and just capturing that matrix just in terms of we all want safer systems, and what's holding back building those safer systems through independent third-party testing?
Okay, so I'll start with two keywords. The first is the national cybersecurity policy, which I think after the Snowden issue or a couple of events happened which triggered that. And along with that, I'll integrate the word called the PPP, the public-private partnership. Now, if you look at it, like the policy says the objective is to build a robust system so that business, people, individual, privacy, security, all these things can be implemented. Now, who's going to do that? is what is the question, and whether the public or the individual researchers or the community has a role to play in that. Now, I'm not sure whether it is explicitly written that anywhere that the community has a role in that, but most of the people, we want to do something for the country or for the organization and all those things. So when we browse through websites or apps and all those things, we come across vulnerabilities. We try to find out who's the contact person to report this. And most of the cases, it ends up with just an email ID, and that is generally a Gmail email ID, not the right person's email ID in most of the cases. But things have changed in the last few years. We have seen NCIPC coming up, and the bug platform, reporting platform has come up. But that doesn't mean it's very comprehensive. There are so many organizations which are not yet part of this reporting, this thing. The second is like what Neelu said, I've heard a couple of researchers facing legal challenges, like they get a mail saying that who authorized you to do this and all those things. So even if you convey that your intention is just to report it and we have not breached or we have not taken any data, but still sometimes, it hits back or it fires back at most of the researchers. So these are some of the challenges. So the next step, some of them get, frustrated and they steal the data and put it on the black market for selling. And, they go into the negative side of these actions. So these are some of the practical challenges or practical instances that were happening in the couple of 4 to 5 years.
So it requires policy addressal on several vectors, starting from the process itself of an individual conducting this activity to reporting and the addresses. One thing I'd also like to follow up. There's also a moral conundrum, right? Because the users are also who are using these services under a existing level of threat if the system is not patched.
Yes. So I'll share one example. One of my team members came across a vulnerability in one of the mobile apps where they see that, you can steal data and the company is not aware of it. So he tried to report it and they said, it's fine, we'll look into it. And they haven't addressed that for a couple of months. For example, almost 7 months it was not patched. And later he resubmitted it, and again, after a couple of months, it was patched, but they did not give the credit to this particular person. So a lot of other factors are there which demoralizes the people with good intention, basically.
Now, Raman, I think the ending remarks, at least the initial remarks, both from Neelu and Manu, have been towards the legality of this. And I would like you to take on the legality. But before you go to the specific legality, also I would be interested in knowing your thoughts on the national cybersecurity policy, which is in a state of formation right now. And also, is there any impact by India's ongoing process to debate a data protection law in terms of any kind of research which may qualify as vulnerability testing as well? And we will come back to the law again in terms of where it should be headed, but just in terms of problem spotting, what do you think are the major chunks which are out there, which are being formed or are already there, which need to be addressed, especially from your perspective as a person who studied the problem at a global level?
Sure. And just to make sure I get the correct part, your second question was has there been any research or data on vulnerability testing in the context of data? Yeah. So I'll try and answer some of those points. And I think the first one was, and thank you for that fantastic setup on the National Cybersecurity Strategy / Policy. This is the interactive part of this to wake you up after lunch. How many of you have heard of the National Cybersecurity Policy? One hand, two hands, three. Okay, not bad. How many have heard of the National Cybersecurity Strategy? Is it the same thing? A couple of people. Good. How many of you know that it's right now there's a consultation being organized by Delhi on this? One hand, and Aditi, 2, 3 more. And a couple of you who are very clearly government who are not raising your hands. Why I asked this is that this is the sort of like often not just disconnect, but the sort of structural questions we must ask in the space of information security or cybersecurity. As you mentioned, that policy document, I think, came from many things. And the reality is any government policy process or document process or any government step is a result of many things, right? Government is messy. That is because government reflects society, and ours as a diverse society has many imperatives that drives this conversation. And for example, it might simply be to sometimes say, look, we have done something. Other times it might be something that's been worked on for years, but a situation provides a trigger and allows perhaps, a few words to be crafted in about, for example, nationalism, sovereignty, and then it's something in relation to the Snowden revelations. But I think what everyone knows, if you've seen the National Cybersecurity Plan document, the policy document, is that a lot of it's great content. I think it's also in many ways reflective of trying to grow human resource capacity. And I know that even the creation of the NCIIPC, people coming here from NCIIPC and other government agencies comes from that process, from that document that says we want to grow the human resources of the community. But the thing of what policy analysts like me are supposed to do is sometimes tell truths to power. And the point everyone rose is that that document has somewhat been a disappointment. In terms of, for example, today, the reality of the different people you talk to, or even the work that, say, the NCIIPC does, or the National Cybersecurity Coordinator does, an agency that not every one of you may be familiar with, rather a person in an agency that not many of you might be familiar with, reflects that the current institutional structure for cybersecurity within at least the union government, the federal government of India, is actually not in one document. And as a policy person, what I say is sometimes it's important to be organized, right? Like if you do a product design and if your product master reference document doesn't outline the entire components of the system, any good product manager will tell you, look, that's a problem, right? Because you don't know what is in your system. And especially from a security perspective, that's even more problematic because then you might have attack surfaces or backdoors or vulnerabilities that you don't know that are there. And that's similarly there from a policy and government perspective as well. I think the government of India is aware of that. It's been therefore in this process of updating its cybersecurity strategy, and that process has been on. But I'd still say there's something what you often see, the New Delhi versus Hyderabad, Bangalore, or Pune divide, right? A conversation that is still often centralized in, the government boardrooms and rooms of Delhi, not necessarily to the sort of community that's here. For example, the government has consulted on the cybersecurity strategy, an important step, but is consulted without giving a document for you to refer to. And so therefore, what you are doing is giving top-level comments, which is great, because perhaps they're looking at it from a fresh slate. You know what they say in Latin sometimes, tabula rasa, a completely blank slate, a blank whiteboard. But often you need to, as you know, again, when you're fixing code, you need to look at something to fix it. And that's one more element there. I think the biggest issue sometimes is the sort of issues you face in not knowing who to sometimes report a vulnerability to, not knowing the fact of what you do, may result in prosecution, and I'll talk to that in a bit. Or even sometimes knowing that the government is encouraging the private sector, not just government itself, which is one of the largest data controllers in, of course, India, but leave that aside, the private sector, which it regulates or it nudges or it can encourage, that it can do more. And what I can say is, looking at cybersecurity conversations globally, I'm struck by the fact that we have a fantastic community of people. We have perhaps one of the best human resource sets in cybersecurity in the world. Again, we could improve, but we still have a very good, large set of people. Ironically, most of you often end up doing work for clients abroad. This isn't something that I'm coming up with. Many of you said this at NullCon, but my colleague Nirmal John with ET Prime written a book where he says that most of the people he's interacted with in the cybersec community prefer clients globally. And to me, that is both a good thing for exporter services in the economy, but it's also a very bad thing in terms of securing our national digital communication setup or even our government assets. And why some of the legal issues are a thing I can go a bit into, but I'm just conscious of time, so I wanted to just pause.
Yeah, and I was also wondering that rather than just keeping questions at the end, we can be participants together in shaping the conversation at this panel. So what I'll do right now, rather than coming back to you, Neelu, immediately, is just being conscious of time and also the great number of people who are here, several of them who actually are hands-on working on these systems, is just to invite any comments if they may have. So I'll just request a volunteer to pass over the mic. You can raise your hand. You can even offer a short remark if you would feel like it. I would definitely encourage you to even post questions to us or just to offer your own thoughts. And don't feel like you don't know enough, because I'm a lawyer and I know nothing about this. Okay, so please go ahead.
You said that on record, huh?
Yeah. We learn from others. So yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah. Hi.
It's on. Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is Nikhil here. So in the recent couple of years, we have seen attacks happening on cryptocurrency-based websites, specifically in India. Now that cryptocurrency was off in India and now it's back again. With all these new, cryptocurrency-based websites or applications that are coming up. Here, this is good. Am I audible? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it only the regulation that needs to be added on top of these companies in order to protect the rights or the privacy of the users, or is it something else more than that? Because there have been a lot of insider jobs for these companies, or there have been some sort of an attack, though nothing has ever been able to nothing has ever happened to these kind of websites or even the company or the organizations. So what do you really suggest on these?
We'll take a couple of few responses in, and I think maybe get your name also if you feel like sharing it, or alias.
Okay, I'm Nikhil.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, I'm Aditi. This is related to the previous panel that Manu was on, where it was mentioned that when you're discussing the economics of data breaches, a lot of the personal data is actually bought, breached personal data is actually bought by private cybersecurity companies for research purposes. So under the Personal Data Protection Bill, there's an exemption for researching. So would such breached personal data used by a cybersecurity firm for research purposes be also exempted from the provisions of the Personal Data Protection Bill?
Anybody else towards this side? I'm a bit blinded by it, but okay, let's just stick with two. Yeah. So, would you like to go first? Yeah.
I can take the first one. So I think this applies to all and not just cybersecurity, not just the cryptocurrency ones that we were talking about. Whether it be cryptocurrency or any other kind of systems, because the technology is improving and there are new companies coming in that format. I think the same point that I was telling beforehand is there has to be a certain level of awareness for a company to actually reach that security, that state of maturity in security. Because when now you look from the company side of it, so we have been telling, and I have also been telling that, okay, we try to do a responsible disclosure, but not everybody is as accepting, or we don't find points of contact, and there are various challenges to reach a stage where we can be, where there are people outside, where we can be a part of a platform like Workcrowd or HackerOne, where we can get the help or crowdsource for these kind of issues from the hackers, is to reach a certain stage of maturity in security yourself. Because once you are at a stage where you can start getting or accepting issues from outside, you should have that machinery already in place, because otherwise it becomes very, very ad hoc. So I have seen companies where my own colleagues and friends who have been trying to put things in place, to get that structure is difficult unless you have a certain level of awareness, a certain level of due diligence yourself, and certain level of maturity. And it also takes up some resources in terms of triaging those defects, telling that researcher, okay, whether it is correct or not, and then also rewarding those researchers correctly. So once you reach there, also, so as a private company, like we were talking about, we should at least have something, if not which is monetary, which others outside are doing, to do at least, for example, give some recognition to that person once you have done the triaging.
Neelu, and at the company side, is there a certification process in terms of how secure your systems are, or is there a benchmark which is set usually for companies to ensure they are following these practices? Okay. How can an ordinary user get to know that their personal data, which is sensitive, is actually safe in a system? Is something like that existing? So
there is no formula. Actually, there is nothing existing per se, even outside. Yeah. There are various kinds of assessments and audits that, keep on checking, or they keep on reviewing your systems, whether they are at a certain stage or not, or how far they are in terms of. So there is no 100% in security, but you can be at a very decent stage if you are going through the whole process of those audits or assessments from time to time.
So on the second question, I think it's a bit flowing from Manu's talk, but it's also like Raman's legal thing. So between both of you, as and when, whoever.
I'll start with the first question, more on the cryptocurrency.
Okay, please, yeah.
If you look at any new technology, take the example of drones. I think 4 or 5 years before drones came, the first thing government did was ban. They took some time, they studied. Now we have a very solid policy or law or whatever you call it, that, okay, at this zone, if you want to fly, this is the process. This zone, if you want to fly, this is the process. So they took some time. They understood the scenario, who can use it, what is the purpose, all those formalities they finished. And now we have a clear policy, if I'm not wrong. Similarly, cryptocurrency, I believe from an Indian perspective or a legal perspective, it's in its very initial stage. Maybe probably that is the reason it was banned for a couple of months or years. Now, recently it was lifted, and now maybe in couple of months we should have a clear policy on where it can be used, who can. Yesterday I was discussing with somebody, is one of his interest area is to open his own cryptocurrency exchange or startup and all those things. So maybe right now we don't have the clear path or legal system, but in the coming days probably we should have it. Because that could be one reason I see the the ban was lifted. So that is point number one. The second point, I think it's more on the legal side. So Mr. Raman should.
Yeah, and just to recap, the second point was on what happens when data which is being leaked is utilized by researchers themselves. In a way, does it fall in the exemptions in the proposed data protection
I think more specifically it was on if, that currently security companies purchase data that's on data breach and use it for their own research. And the specific question from that was under the current data protection bill that's in Parliament. Remember, it's a bill. It is not a law yet. It has to be passed by Parliament. The members of Parliament you all have elected have to look at it in both houses, so the text can change. But under that security research exemption, what happens? And I can try and do an answer for this. And by the way, if anyone's interested, since this is a highly complicated speculative data protection question, I think that entitles me to be appointed to this DPA when it gets created. So if anyone's looking for applications for that, please, I'm happy to apply. But jokes aside, what you're talking about is the security research question that's then data protection laws. What I just mentioned is that's ironically become something over the last couple of years has become something that was not controversial, that is now controversial because, again, overused company referred to in privacy and cybersecurity communities, Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica misused the security research exemption under UK law and now the GDPR to do what it did. Now, what you mentioned in this case, I would just speculating, basing on the law staying as it is, that while you might claim that what you're doing is covered by the security research exemption, there is a separate data breach provision, including allowing the proposed data protection authority, the independent regulator that this law would create, to issue regulations and directions about the breach data. Which means that technically exchanges that are doing this today could be at least facing executive regulation in the future, if not a categorical ban by the law of Parliament. But this is something that we should look at, and I would argue that this is the reason why the security research exemption actually needs to be tightened. And this is where people like crumple up paper and throw it at me and go boo in a security research conference. But because you've seen the misuse that's there. But more importantly, for people who operate in the transactional side in this space, it's a point to be very careful about what you have. And by the way, again, if people who are purchasing breach data from other countries and commercially transacting off it, I would probably say, again, without being an expert about the enforcement of the GDPR or other country data protection laws, that actually you're edging into dangerous territory. And you should be cautious about that. I think I just wanted to go back on the crypto point a bit briefly, because I think what you also show is the structural problem, right? You mentioned recently, drawing reference to the fact that the Supreme Court has actually overturned the government's blanket regulation of cryptocurrency in India, saying not that you can't regulate it, but they said you can't do a blanket ban in this manner. It's disproportionate. You have to follow certain processes, including being very clear about what you want to do, in what manner, and is there a less intrusive mechanism, right? This is what the courts do in India. The courts step in to say, you may have powers, government, but you have to follow a process, including saying, is this the least intrusive mechanism? Why I mentioned this is one of the reasons of perhaps not knowing about security vulnerabilities or even breaches in the cryptocurrency space in India is, if you're a cryptocurrency operator, you're already doing something that's potentially illegal until 3 days ago. Are you going to go and then who are you going to talk to? The most talented regulator or talented set of government agencies in this space happens to be the RBI, the same entity that says you should not exist and is extremely hostile to you, right? So from a policy perspective, this goes back to the question that you want cybersecurity agencies who everyone can talk to. The best cybersecurity agency in the world is someone who says, we don't worry, like law enforcement, other national policy concerns are there. Our job is just to make sure we are as secure as possible from a network security and national security perspective. Again, national security not being that we go after bad actors, we protect our networks. And why I mention this is that the most effective cybersecurity agencies are ones who might take people even from different agencies, but who say, look, don't worry about us on our other hats. What you come and tell us is completely fine. And that's why in many countries, when you have data breach reporting clauses in their data protection laws, the people who benefit the most, ironically, are cybersecurity people, because they say, at least we know the data. We know the number of breaches that are happening. We can proactively reach out. If we have to initiate criminal investigations or whatever, that will happen, but at least we know what's there. And that's again a critical learning for us. The ability to have a conversation without feeling like you're talking to a cop or you're talking to a regulator is sometimes very important in the cybersecurity space, at least from my perspective.
And just for the benefit of the larger crowd, we put out explainers on policy and governance on our social media at Internet Freedom on Twitter. We have made a 8-tweet thread on the cryptocurrency ban by itself, which breaks it down in a way which is accessible and has further links if you would like to explore this material. I think there's also a large gap which exists, which is gradually decreasing between law, governance, and the actual technical frameworks which it's seeking to regulate. So it should come ground up. And just talking about ground up, let's open it up to another round of questions and remarks. Again, please feel free to participate. Please do ask us if you have any questions on the law. With that, I'll come after we gather the questions towards some closing comments from the panel. Please go ahead, sir.
So, I don't know whether it is a question or not, but it's more about two different things that we have discussed that today. So let's say one thing is, let's say I know a security vulnerability in some of the government system. So that's one thing, and we don't have a system to report it. But we are also preparing, as you say, it's something called as cybersecurity policy. So is it going to cover this particular thing? So if I take a specific example, let's say a bug bounty. Is India going to support a bug bounty on a national websites or a national apps or something like other things? So that's one question. The second question is related to the breaches. So on a cybersecurity level, we know that what are the breaches has happened on a government side, and there are certain capability issues on handling certain data on of a government related stuff. So next time when now in current world, although we're preparing a cyber security policy, but while giving a contracts to the companies about handling all those data, are we still looking like an old world that who's giving me more money, so I'll give him a contract? Or are we still looking at, okay, this company had given a last contract, he had involved in many data breaches, I don't want to give him a contract? These are the two questions, sir.
Anybody else? Yeah, right here. Was there somebody at the back? I'm sorry, it's a dark room. Yeah, we'll start from the back and then come to the front. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Abhas. One insight if I can have from the panel. There was a data breach, TGX data breach, which happened long back, in which, again, data was reported by the companies. The credit card data was leaked, and eventually it was reported by the credit card company, rather than company knowing it. So, are there any measures which have been taken place to bridge this gap? Basically, company gets to know at a much later stage by a different entity itself. So, the whole chain which is there, any laws or any policy have come which has bridged this gap, so that there is better collaboration between these.
So, a reporting requirement for data breaches, essentially.
Right.
Okay, and we'll come to the front here. Very front, first row.
So, notwithstanding the new data protection bill, is there anything in the IT Act which could be used to prosecute people who find vulnerabilities on, government websites?
Just to restate that for clarity, is there anything under the IT Act which would make illegal for people to report data breaches?
Or to even try to find them?
Or even try to find data breaches or vulnerabilities much more generally. I think that's a very broad domain the audience has thrown up for you. I'll start this side. Manu, go to you, Raman, and then you.
I'll address the first question, and then maybe the other panelists can get to the other topic. Two points. First one, if I don't know how many of you have attended Nalcon 3 or I think 4 or 5 years before, where a government agency came to Nalcon. There was a bounty program. If I'm not wrong, that time the price was around 50,000 rupees. It happened almost 6 hours. they opened the challenge and the community cracked it and the government paid the money then and there itself.
Wow.
So this happened 4 or 5 years before when the Nalcon was happening at Boknalo Beach Resort. So it happens, but not like how structured, like how HackerOne or XYZ platforms are offering. Second is, right now there is a hunting program by the NCIPC where I'm not sure whether any cash is provided or any money is there, but you get a letter as well as some goodies and all those things. I'm not sure about the financial aspect of it. So the platform is set now, which was not there 2 or 3 years before. Probably we should, most of the people have recommended, some incentive has to be added to it. So I think in a couple of years, it should be on.
I can address the last question because I think it builds on what you said about incentives, right? That you want positive things from government agencies, particularly the NCIIPC, which exists. Of course, the NCIIPC has a mandate that's actually very specific, right? It is to protect critical infrastructure. It is not to protect everything, although I know they do a great job right now forwarding and contacting and nudging other agencies to do things. But technically, they're one specialized agency. Again, this may change subsequent to the updated National Cybersecurity Strategy. But your question is valid that currently under the Information Technology Act, the IT Act, not the Income Tax Act, which is the other IT Act, the Information Technology Act has a provision that essentially is a provision that criminalizes hacking. And unfortunately, the way hacking is defined is very broad. It is essentially any unauthorized use or access into a system that impacts its information. And now, of course, and if you know that nearly everything that many of you do, from a network probe to a basic check to sometimes even a stress or a penetration test, is something that violates that section. And one of the problems with 43, the section on hacking, is that it doesn't really go into intent and it doesn't have a security research exception. And by the way, unfortunately, this is a problem not just true of India. Many other countries' laws often have this problem. Even the United States with its Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the CFAA, has a section which is a bit overbroad, and federal prosecutors have used that to harass people. Those of you who are familiar with the Creative Commons or the larger open culture space know of Aaron Swartz. And Aaron Swartz was hounded and eventually committed suicide because of US federal prosecution pressure. The problem in India is that some of this stuff could be fixed by the government itself without even a change to that law. While that law perhaps should be amended and tweaked, at the very least what you can do is issue a public statement from this union government, not a statement, a policy document saying, we will not prosecute people who report vulnerabilities, so provided they follow a certain ethical framework. This is what many countries have done. The Dutch are very famous for this. Many other countries, the Australians, even the Canadians, most of the Western, democracies have policy documents saying, if you're a security researcher who follows a basic ethical framework, doesn't try to extort, the target, does it in a respected way, doesn't breach this publicly, you won't be prosecuted. And that's something that is very good and positive there. So that's an example of something that we should perhaps see more action on. I think there's also one question from the second person.
In interest of time, can we just skip to, because we are just about to hit the buzzer.
I'll take it quickly. So I'd like to answer the first and the second one. First, very briefly, I think from where we are extending in the discussion, we need to have that kind of a platform where we can have this ethical framework very, very clearly defined so that bug hunters, when they're trying to report something ethically, while they may not be rewarded for it, but they can at least do so in a very seamless manner. And there is an SLA to fixing those issues because it's our data at stake, especially in case of government organizations handling data. The second one, where we are talking about the card data being breached, I think there are definitely regulations that they have to follow. So like PCI DSS and other regulations in which they are actually liable if they do not report under a certain time frame. But there are also other domains which belong to all of these other regulations. And with the data protection bill coming in, there will always be SLAs and timelines within which you have to report it at least to your users or end customers.
So we're hitting the time in interests of making sure that the schedule of this program goes on time. We'll be ending it here. Before we end it, 2 takeaways. The first is that to make this conversation actionable and not a mere panel, we at the Internet Freedom Foundation will be summarizing these conversations and also will attempt to engage with the specific government entities which have been highlighted by the panelists. We are all towards supporting a much more cyber secure India. The second thing is that when you do come across a vulnerability, please do feel free to reach out to us if you feel you are under a level of legal threat. and we'll make sure we can counsel you and help mitigate those risks. With that, I would like to thank this excellent panel. We are all here. We can have one-to-one conversations, and I look forward to talking to some of you as well as my fellow panelists off stage. Thank you, Ilu. Thank you, Raman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. It's been excellent talking to you today.